So now we're going to start looking at Greece, and particularly we're going to start looking at what's called the prehistoric Aegean. Now the Aegean Sea, you can see there's that body of water which basically surrounds most of Greece. We call it prehistoric Aegean because we don't really have history in Greece until about 776 BC. That's the date of the first Olympic Games, so we'll come back to that later on. So prehistoric Aegean is basically the Greek Bronze Age, and you can see on the map here that Greece is divided sort of geographically into these three main regions, which is the mainland part, which is kind of the light green on the left, the Cycladic Islands, which is the group of islands in the middle there, and then the island of Crete, which is in the south. Looking at here another map here, those particular regions in the Bronze Age are referred to by particular cultural names. So those on the mainland are referred to either as Mycenaeans or the Helladic period. Those in the Cycladic Islands are Cycladic, and then those on the island of Crete are referred to either as Cretan or Minoan. And essentially these are our three relative dates for the prehistoric Aegean is Minoan, Cycladic, and Helladic. It refers to essentially the period from about 3200 BC until about 1100 BC. Now this is a chronological chart just to, I know it's very small, you can't see very much of it, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about. So when Egypt is in the Old Kingdom, then in Crete we have what's called the Proto-Palatial. In the Cyclades we have what's called the Early Cycladic, and on the mainland we have what's called the Early Helladic. Now you'll see very quickly that there is nothing even close in comparison to the grandeur of the Old Kingdom pyramids happening in Greece during this time. So Greece will take a little bit more time to develop. When we start seeing the first palaces rise in Greece, and on the Crete one, that's the second category, that's called the Proto-Palatial, that's when Middle Kingdom Egypt is happening. The Neo-Palatial, the new period of Crete, of the palaces, is when we have the second intermediary period in Egypt, and if you might remember, that is when we have the Hyksos ruling. That's also when we have the labyrinth-like depiction in that bull leaping painting. The New Kingdom of Egypt coincides with the late Minoan period on Crete, the late Cycladic period in the Cyclades, and the beginnings of the rise of the late Helladic period on the mainland. That's where we start getting mainland activity starting to happen. By the time we get to sort of the middles of the New Kingdom, where we have some of the tubes in Thebes, etc., the late Helladic is fully developed, and we're starting to see the development of the palaces and the tombs, etc., on the mainland of Greece, and we start to see a destruction on the island of Crete. Now this is just to kind of give you an idea, to kind of have an idea of what's happening in Egypt while what's happening in Greece during this time. We're going to focus now on Greece, and we're going to look at it first at the Cycladic Islands, then we're going to go to Crete, and then we're going to look at the mainland of Greece. So the Cyclades are this group of islands here in the middle of the Aegean. You can see a closer up here map showing you the various islands, all these small tiny islands. They don't have a very great number of resources. They are pretty rocky. They don't have very much deep soil for much agriculture, although luckily the olive tree does not require very deep roots, so it's easy to actually grow even on rocky islands like these. Some of the sites I'm just going to briefly mention are the site of Kastri on the island of Syros. The island of Naxos has a couple of cemeteries and some sites I'm just going to briefly mention, and then a couple of other important sites are listed there: Skarkos and Ios, Markiani and Amorgos, and Mount Kythnos on Delos. We're not going to look at those particularly. So just to give you an idea, when we're talking about these island sites, most of the settlements that survive are in high elevations. The threat and any kind of risks that might exist during this time come from other island sites. So strategically you're going to basically build your site on an area that can easily have view of the sea in case someone's coming to attack. So the case of Khalendereni, or also known as Kastri on Syros, it's very, very high. It's at the very, very top there. And what remains of Kastri, you can see parts of it here, It was built at the end of the early Cycladic period. It's not far from the sea. It's on a steep hilltop, as we saw. It's estimated to occupy about 3.5 to 5,000 square meters. And some of the excavations revealed some stone-built buildings, rectangular shape, and we also have some fortification walls. You can see here that it is a small fortified citadel. The valley just below has numerous cemeteries, and they're probably associated with the actual settlement that we have here. They would bury the dead below in that cemetery. The fortification we see here consists of a wall with basically 6 bastions. These are these hollow projections built of small sort of slabs. Outside the wall is a second defensive wall, so you can see we have 2 rows. The entrance into the actual fort area is gained through one of the bastions. Within the walls, you can make out here, there are tiny groups of tiny houses divided by passageways. Some of them have curved walls. Hearths are found in some of the rooms to kind of give us an idea of how they were being used. One contained a crucible and a hoard of metal, which implies that they were doing some kind of metal production. They also have some molds that were found inside the site, indicative of lead working on the site. So this is just one example of a site. Now, when we're talking about fortifications, as we said very early on, you fortify a site because you actually have something you want to protect. It could be people, or it could be actual things. The position of Castri on the steep hilltop and the fortification indicate the necessity of greater protection during this period. And this is as we start to see sort of greater economic and social changes, an increase in competitiveness between the different islands and potentially also from the mainland. So what they're protecting in this case could be their finished products they're going to be trading with. They most likely are not protecting, in this case, agriculture, because as I said, the islands do not have a very great surplus of that. Here are just some views from the top. Now, one thing we'll notice is in Greece, majority of what we're going to look at is made out of stone. Greece has a lot of stone architecture, and because it has a lot of stone sources. So while they do have mud brick walls that do not really survive today, what survives and what excavators discover are stone foundations and the sort of the lower sockets of the stone walls before the mud brick parts were actually being built. So what we're looking at here are some of those remains of the stone foundations. The Cyclades are known primarily for their tombs, and the basic tomb is something called the cyst, and you can see a couple of examples here. It's basically a pit dug into the ground. It's lined with stones on the sides, and you can make out from the plans there. The exact shape varies, but they're usually trapezoidal in shape. The dead person would be laid, they would be inhumed, so placed inside the actual tomb, and they would be in the contracted position. So their knees would be drawn up, which is why some of these they're fairly small, so they're 3-foot long tombs, but because they're contracted, you can actually fit the burial within that space. In some cases, when further burials were made in the same tomb, they would basically take those single-story tomb, you see one on the top there, and actually make a double-story, and you can see this middle one here, so that the lower part would be used as an ossuary where the bones would get stored, and then on the top they would actually place the new occupant of the tomb. That lower one there is a kind of even fancier one, which is a more circular type of corbelled tomb. Those are rare, and they're most likely just preference. We actually get those just if somebody decides to use that kind. Here are some images of those tombs, and here is a cemetery on the island of Naxos, where you can see a whole bunch of those slabs visible there where those tombs actually were. In the tombs we have numerous finds. Some are made out of stone. The Cycladic Islands are known for their marble source, and what we have here on the left is an actual vase made out of marble. On the right there's a similar one made out of clay. We have different clay boxes. This is a piece of pottery. It's a lidded clay box. We have some types of vessels. These are all ceramic, known as frying pans. They look like frying pans, with various decorations. The decoration during this time is very abstract, so we have patterns, stars, triangles, wheel-like patterns, spirals are very common, and in some cases we actually have ships as well. The decoration on these is either incised or sometimes they're actually stamped. The frying pan type that we see here is because it has this sort of shape of a skillet. The decoration on these is usually on the outside rim and not on the sort of inside part. So when we think about them, in order for them to be displayed, if it was in fact used as something like a frying pan, you would never actually see the decoration because it would be on the bottom part. The name is just given that because it actually looks like a frying pan, not because it was used as such. They're usually found in graves. There is, you can see some of the details there of the incised patterns on them. This one is probably the most famous one, and it's one showing a ship decoration. So you can see on the lower part there's a sort of triangular area that has been interpreted maybe as a sort of pubic triangle fertility aspect, and just above it is a boat, and above that is sort of what is being interpreted as a starry sky. I'll show you a close-up of the boat area right now. It's this part right here. So you see these sort of wavy spirals below, and then these spirals above that are either the waves or an indication, sort of an abstract indication of the starry sky. Here are just two examples of the marble quarries. As I mentioned, it has extensive marble, and most of the objects we're going to be seeing produced and found in the tombs are made out of the marble. We do have some metal work, and this is important if I'm at the Bronze Age to see what kind of production they're having. The three islands you see here, Siros on the sort of upper middle part, Naxos sort of there in the middle, and then Amorgos a little bit lower there, are the most important centers with metal working, showing that they actually did produce objects that could be used but also potentially traded and bartered. Some examples here, just the different types that we have. We have bronze daggers, we have some chisels here, a crescent-shaped tool, we have a bronze saw, we have these are again daggers. Most of these you'll note come from graves. These are some more elaborate types of finds. So we have a silver diadem. On the lower left there is a reconstruction showing the sort of a narrative scene on the diadem. And then on the right there is a group of different pins made in copper, bone, silver. So what we start to see is that when they're making the metal work, it's not only utilitarian pieces like tools and weapons, but we do actually start to get a few objects that are more like toiletries, that are more sort of elaborate type things that are not utilitarian in that way.